Have you ever noticed how loud the world had become? Everywhere you go, someone's talking. Online, in meetings, at dinner tables, even in moments that used to be sacred. Silence is replaced by explanation, argument, commentary. It's like we've all been convinced that if we're not speaking, we're disappearing. But here's a quiet truth. In a room full of noise, the one who speaks less often holds the most power. One careless phrase, one impulsive comment. That's all it takes to destroy something you've spent months, maybe years building. A single sentence can break trust. A stray remark can end a relationship. A moment of unchecked emotion can define you forever in someone else's mind. That's not being dramatic. That's being real. Because in this fast-paced, hyperverbal world, people don't remember all the context. They remember the moment you lost your cool, the time you said too much, the phrase that landed wrong. And while they forget everything else, that one mistake echoes. I've seen it happen. Maybe you have too. A friend who jokes at the wrong time in a meeting, a partner who snaps during an argument and can't take the words back, a post on social media that derails someone's career. All because they didn't pause, they didn't breathe, they didn't master their tongue. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago, long before smartphones, long before microphones, long before the need to update, comment, and share. Epictetus said, "He who masters his words masters his destiny." He didn't mean we should walk around mute and afraid. He meant we should be intentional, disciplined, mindful. He meant we should choose our words as carefully as we choose our values. Because words aren't just sounds, they're direction. They shape how people see us. More importantly, they shape how we see ourselves. The words you speak today will either build your character or betray it. That's why learning to speak less is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's restraint. It's strength under pressure. And that strength, it's rare. That's why it stands out. We live in a culture that rewards quick comebacks, hot takes, and being the loudest voice in the room. But Stoicism teaches something very different. It teaches that silence, not as avoidance, but as mastery, is one of the greatest tools for living well. Not every emotion needs a reaction. Not every thought deserves to become a sentence. And not every sentence will bring you closer to the person you want to be. I'm not here to tell you to stop expressing yourself. I'm here to invite you to something deeper. A kind of stillness that gives you presence. A kind of quiet that makes people lean in, not tune out. A form of speech that's slow, measured, intentional, and unforgettable. Because let's be honest, the person who can stay centered when others lose control, who can pause when provoked, who speaks with clarity rather than volume, that person commands the room. Not with noise, but with gravity. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt the cost of not living this way. Maybe you've said things in anger and watched them do damage you never intended. Maybe you've over-explained yourself, chasing approval, only to feel more misunderstood. Maybe you've shared dreams too early, only to see them laughed at, stolen, or dissolve into nothing. If so, you're not alone. I've been there, many of us have. But here's the good news, it's never too late to reclaim your voice or your silence. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 12 Stoic principles that will help you stop sabotaging yourself with your words. These aren't vague theories or lofty ideals. They're real practical tools which rooted in ancient wisdom and designed for modern life. They'll help you speak with more intention and more impact. They'll help you build trust, protect your energy, and become someone who inspires without having to explain. Because the more you speak with purpose, the less you have to prove. And no, this isn't about staying silent out of fear. This is about speaking from strength, choosing when to speak, choosing what to share, choosing how to respond. It's about training your tongue to serve your values, not your impulses. There's power in that. So if you're tired of talking your way into regret, if you want to reclaim your peace, your presence, and your influence, you're in the right place. Let's begin with the first of these 12 Stoic principles and unlock the quiet strength that's already inside you. Principle 1, results matter more than words. We all know someone who talks a lot about what they're going to do. Maybe it's a friend who says, "This is my year, I'm finally getting in shape." Or a colleague who's always about to launch that big side project. They say all the right things. They sound confident, even inspiring. But weeks go by, then months, and nothing really happens. Maybe at some point that person was you. I know at one point it was me. We live in a world where talk is easy and loud. Social media makes it so tempting to share every plan before we've taken the first real step. We announce goals like press releases, looking for encouragement, support, applause. But here's what often happens. The more we talk about what we're going to do, the less likely we are to actually do it. Why? Because when you talk too early, you feel a sense of satisfaction without doing anything. Your brain gets a premature reward, a little dopamine hit. You feel like you've made progress, when in fact, you've barely begun. I once had a friend named Madison. She was a talented young photographer with a sharp eye and a unique perspective. One day, she shared her dream project on Instagram, an artistic photo series documenting untold stories in small towns across the Midwest. She posted the mood board, the route map, even announced the project name. People loved it. Comments poured in. "You're amazing. I can't wait to see it. This is so needed." But then, nothing. Weeks passed. No photos, no updates, just silence. She later admitted that all that attention, all that early praise, it drained her motivation. She'd already received the emotional payoff without doing the work. And worse, the pressure to now live up to that image overwhelmed her. She lost momentum before she ever got started. Months later, she deleted the original posts. She stopped talking. And she started quietly working. She traveled without announcing it. She took photos, edited, learned from failed shots. No one knew what she was doing, and then one day she uploaded the finished project. No hype, no build-up, just results. And it was powerful, more than anyone expected. Wow, because this time she let the work speak. That shift in mindset, talk less, do more, is one of the most powerful lessons Stoicism teaches. Marcus Aurelius said, "Stop talking about what a good man should be one." He didn't mean we shouldn't set goals or have standards. He meant embody the values. Let your actions prove your character, not your promises. When I first read that quote, it hit me like a quiet storm. I realized how much energy I had wasted trying to explain who I was, what I planned to become, what I might achieve. All that explaining, when I could have just been doing. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly impressed by someone, not because of what they said, but because of what they quietly delivered? That's the person who commands respect. The one who doesn't seek applause in the process but earns admiration with the outcome. In a culture obsessed with visibility, they choose depth. While others broadcast, they build. It's not easy, I know. We all crave connection, encouragement, reassurance. But here's something that changed the way I operate. I started keeping a private journal, not just for thoughts, but for progress. Each day I'd write one sentence about what I actually did. Not what I planned, not what I meant to do, but what I did. Over time, that list became my proof, my quiet validation. No need to tell the world I had something real. You can do the same. Maybe for you it's a notebook. Maybe it's a locked folder in your phone. The format doesn't matter. What matters is shifting the reward from being seen to being disciplined, from saying it to showing it. And if you catch yourself wanting to share something just to prove you're working on it, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeking motivation or approval? Because if it's approval, it's worth waiting. Wait until you have results. Wait until the work is done. That's when your words will carry weight, because they're backed by reality. Here's a little phrase I started using that might help. I'm already working on it. Not I'm going to or I might, but I'm already doing it. And if I'm not, then I don't say anything yet. Silence is powerful not just because it hides, but because it protects. It shields your energy from distraction. It guards your focus from outside influence. And when it's time, when the work is ready, your results will be loud enough. So ask yourself this: are you speaking about the life you want, or are you quietly building it? The world doesn't need more declarations. It needs more demonstrations, less performance, more proof. You don't have to be invisible, but you can be intentional. Let your discipline echo louder than any announcement. Because when you move in silence, no one can stop you. But when you speak too soon, anyone can beat you to it or talk you out of it. Let your work be the story. Let your progress be the introduction. Let your results be the headline. That's the kind of strength that doesn't fade. That's what people remember. Principle 2. Don't share every wound with everyone. There's a strange pressure these days to be endlessly open. Vulnerability is everywhere, on social media, in conversations, even in professional spaces. We're told to be authentic, to speak our truth, to share what we're going through as if the mere act of revealing is always healing. But what if it's not? What if there's a kind of strength in knowing when to keep certain parts of yourself private, not out of fear, but out of wisdom? Let me tell you about someone I knew. Let's call him Jack. He worked in marketing at a mid-sized company. Smart guy, well-liked, thoughtful. One afternoon, during a team lunch, the conversation turned serious. People were talking about stress, burnout, the toll of long hours. And in a moment of openness, Jack shared something real, that he'd been quietly struggling with depression for the past year. It was brave, honest, raw. Everyone nodded supportively. One person even thanked him for being so candid. But a few weeks later, during a tense meeting where Jack missed a small deadline, one of his colleagues made a joke. Something like, "You okay there, Jack? Not one of your down days again, is it?" The room went quiet. Some chuckled, awkwardly. Jack forced a smile, but something shifted. The air changed. And in that moment, Jack realized something he hadn't expected. What he had shared in vulnerability was now being used as a punchline. And it hurt. Not because he regretted the truth of what he said, but because he gave access to a part of himself that not everyone knew how to handle with care. We've all been taught that talking heals. And yes, sometimes it does, but only in the right space. with the right people at the right time, because not every listener is a safe space. Not every conversation is a sanctuary, and not everyone deserves to hold your wounds. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that speaks directly to this. Don't worry about what others think of you. Focus on what you think of yourself. In other words, your value is not determined by how openly others understand your pain. It's shaped by how clearly you understand your worth, even in silence. There's this belief that if you don't share, you're hiding, that if you keep things to yourself, you're being inauthentic. But that's not true. Sometimes silence is respect for your own process. Sometimes discretion is strength, not shame. I've been there too. There was a time in my life when I overshared. Not because I wanted attention, but because I was looking for connection. I thought, if I tell someone my deepest pain, maybe they'll understand me. Maybe they'll see me. Maybe I'll feel less alone. And sometimes it worked, but more often it didn't. Because what I didn't realize then is this: when you reveal your inner world to someone who hasn't earned your trust, you hand them a weapon they may not even know they're holding. And once it's out, you can't take it back. So now I ask myself a simple question before opening up. Has this person shown me loyalty or just friendliness? Because there's a big difference. Kindness is easy. Loyalty is rare. And here's something else I've learned. You don't need to speak everything to heal. You can write it down. Reflect on it in solitude. Talk to a therapist. You can cry it out in the privacy of your room. That's not isolation. That's honoring the sacredness of your inner work. You are not a reality show. You are not required to share every emotion on cue. You don't have to explain every scar to feel valid. One of the most powerful things I've started doing is sharing small, neutral pieces of myself first. Not the full story, but just enough to see what someone does with it. Do they hold it gently, or does it become gossip within the hour? That tells you everything. And when someone crosses a line, when they laugh at what was sacred, or minimize what was meaningful, you'll know this is not your space. These are not your people. And that's okay. Because when you stop giving every part of yourself to people who haven't earned it, you start reclaiming something vital: your self-respect. Stoicism isn't about being cold. It's about being conscious. It teaches us that our peace isn't found in being understood by everyone, but in understanding ourselves deeply enough that we no longer need to be. So if you've ever been hurt by sharing too much too soon, you're not weak. You're just human. But now you know better. You don't need an audience to process your pain. You need inner stillness, a safe space, a strong center, and you have that. So the next time you feel the urge to open up, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this to connect, or am I hoping someone else will carry what I haven't yet made peace with? Because that's not their job. It's yours, and you are strong enough to hold it until the right person comes along who knows how to hold it with you. Principle 3, don't explain every decision you make. Why didn't you call them back? Why didn't you go to the party? Why did you leave that job? Why aren't you doing what everyone else is doing? These questions may seem innocent, but over time, they wear you down. They make you feel like every step you take needs to be justified, explained, wrapped in a neat little speech so that everyone else feels okay with your choices. But here's a hard truth most people won't say out loud. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you choose to live your life, especially when you're acting from clarity, not confusion. I think about Susan, a friend of mine who worked for years in corporate sales. She was good at it, respected, paid well. People thought she had it made, but inside she felt numb, drained. Something wasn't right. She had always dreamed of working with her hands, of making something real. Pottery, of all things, called to her. At first, it was just a weekend hobby, then a side hustle, and one day, without making a big announcement, she handed in her resignation and opened a small studio in a nearby town. You can probably guess what happened next. People were confused. Some were supportive, sure, but others, they didn't get it. Wait, you left your job for clay? You had benefits, a team, a title. Are you okay? Some even tried to talk her out of it, not maliciously, just from their own fear. And that's the thing. Most people react not to your decisions, but to what those decisions trigger in them. Your courage stirs up their doubts. Your clarity exposes their confusion. So they question you, not because you're wrong, but because you're reminding them that change is possible, and that's uncomfortable. At first, Susan tried to explain. She found herself defending her joy, mapping out her income projections, assuring people she wasn't losing her mind. But after a while, she stopped. She realized that the more she explained, the more it seemed like she needed permission. And she didn't. She was already at peace. That moment reminded me of one of the most powerful Stoic teachings from Epictetus. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. In other words, live it. Let your life be the evidence. Let your presence, your peace, your focus be the answer. There's something incredibly freeing about not explaining yourself. It's not about being rude. It's about honoring the fact that your life is not a courtroom. You're not on trial. And the people who truly care about you, they don't need a detailed report to support your growth. They just want to see you well. When I left my first stable job to follow something less certain, but more aligned with who I was becoming, I got the questions too. The raised eyebrows, the casual remarks disguised as concern, and I used to panic, feeling like I had to reassure everyone, prove I'd thought it through, walk them through every step of the decision-making process. But what I learned is this: when you feel clear, you don't need to convince. When you feel grounded, you don't need applause. And when you're walking your path with intention, even if it's quiet, it's powerful. Here's the problem with explaining too much. It gives people space to plant doubt. You say, I left that job because I needed more creative freedom. And they say, but was that really the best move financially? And suddenly you're second-guessing yourself. Not because you were wrong, but because you gave away your center to someone who doesn't carry your vision. So here's what I practice now. Short, calm responses. It felt right. I made the decision for myself. I'm following something important to me. No defense, no drama, just clarity. And when someone presses, as they sometimes do, I smile and say, it's okay if it doesn't make sense to you. It makes sense to me. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. Because not every decision needs a speech. Some just need to be lived. Some just need to be followed through quietly, like a river changing course without asking the mountain for permission. And if you're someone who struggles with this, someone who constantly explains, justifies, over-explains, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. Am I doing this because I want to be understood or because I want to be accepted? Because if you're trying to be accepted, you'll forever feel like you're not enough. But if you're walking in self-trust, acceptance becomes irrelevant. You're not looking for approval. You're looking for peace, and peace doesn't need an audience. So the next time someone questions a decision you've made from a place of honesty, and self-respect. Remember this, you don't have to shrink your story to fit their comfort. You don't have to dilute your path to make it palatable. You don't have to explain a thing. Just embody it. Let your life speak. The people who get it will never need an explanation. Principle 4. Learn the art of saying no. Have you ever said yes when every part of you was screaming no? You were exhausted, burnt out, maybe overwhelmed, but you nodded anyway. You smiled politely. You agreed to something you didn't want to do. And afterward, you were left with a familiar feeling. Resentment toward them, frustration at yourself, and this heavy awareness that you just betrayed your own needs. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Brian was one of those people. Reliable, always there. The guy who stayed late when no one else did, who picked up extra tasks because it's just easier if I do it. The kind of person people depended on and unknowingly took advantage of. One afternoon, after a long stretch of back-to-back meetings, Brian was getting ready to shut his laptop and finally head home when a coworker popped her head in. "Hey, do you mind reviewing this report with me before I send it off? I know it's last minute." He paused, his chest tightened. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. His head was pounding, and still out of reflex he said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." But it was a problem, a big one, because by the time he got home, it was dark. Dinner was cold. His partner was already asleep, and Brian, once again, had given away a piece of his life for someone else's comfort. That night, something shifted. He started asking himself, why do I keep doing this? For Brian, like many of us, saying yes had become a habit, a defense mechanism. He didn't want to let people down. He didn't want us to seem selfish. And deep down, he feared what people would think of him if he set a boundary. But here's the truth. Every time you say yes to something you don't mean, you're saying no to something that matters more. Your time, your energy, your peace. And that comes at a cost. One morning, Brian tried something different. When someone asked him to take on a task he didn't have the bandwidth for, instead of his usual automatic yes, he said, "Let me check my schedule first, and I'll get back to you." That one sentence gave him space to reflect, to breathe, to respond instead of react. And you know what happened? Nothing terrible. The world didn't end. The request got handled by someone else. And Brian, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel resentful. He felt powerful. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that speaks perfectly to this. Do what your nature requires of you, and don't be distracted by anything else. Your nature, your true self, doesn't require you to please everyone. It doesn't demand that you stretch yourself thin to be worthy. It simply asks you to honor what's true for you and to act from that place. Learning to say no isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting yourself in. It's about protecting what's essential so that when you do show up for others, it's from a place of strength, not obligation. Now, this isn't always easy. If you're someone who struggles with boundaries, saying no can feel terrifying. It can trigger guilt, fear, or even shame. That's why it helps to have a few tools in your pocket. First, delay your answer. You don't owe anyone an immediate response. Use Brian's line, "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." That pause creates clarity. Second, practice saying no without over-explaining. You don't need a 3-paragraph excuse. A simple, "that doesn't work for me right now" is enough. Respectful, firm, clear. And third, here's the fun part. Imagine Marcus Aurelius in your workplace. Picture him sitting in a meeting, being asked to lead yet another committee or cover for someone again. He'd probably say something like, "No, I need to meditate on the fleeting nature of time." Okay, maybe not exactly like that, but the spirit is there. Because time is fleeting, your energy is finite, and if you don't protect it, no one else will. So the next time you feel that knee-jerk urge to say yes, ask yourself, am I doing this out of fear or alignment? Will this choice move me closer to who I want to become or further away? Sometimes saying no for 5 uncomfortable seconds saves you from hours of regret. Sometimes a quiet no today protects your capacity to show up fully tomorrow. You don't have to be rude, you don't have to be cold, but you do have to be honest, especially with yourself. And honesty begins with a boundary. So if your heart is tired, if your calendar is overflowing, if your peace feels like it's on life support, maybe it's time. Time to stop apologizing for needing space. Time to stop proving your worth by how much you give. Time to start saying yes to your own well-being. Because in the end, it's not how much you say yes that defines you. It's how wisely you say no. Principle 5. Stay silent when you're angry. Anger is fast. It doesn't knock before it enters. It surges in like a storm, taking over your body before your brain even has a chance to catch up. 1 second you're fine. The next you're saying things you don't mean, things you can't take back. We've all been there. I've been there. So had Rachel, a dedicated elementary school teacher with a kind heart and steady presence. She loved her job, loved her students. But one morning something snapped. She'd been up late grading papers. She hadn't had time for breakfast. Her head was already pounding when she walked into her 3rd grade classroom. And then came the trigger. A student accidentally spilled juice all over a stack of graded homework. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even a big deal. But to Rachel, in that fragile moment, it was the final straw. She raised her voice, harder than she ever had before. The student froze. The room went quiet. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Later that day, Rachel sat alone in the staff lounge. Her coffee had gone cold, and she replayed that moment in her mind again and again, not because of the mess, but because of the look on that child's face. Confused, hurt, ashamed, all because she couldn't pause long enough to breathe. If she had taken just 1 minute, things could have gone differently. Seneca once wrote, "Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured." In other words, when you unleash your anger, it may hit others, but it damages you first. Your credibility, your relationships, your peace of mind. That's the thing about anger. It doesn't come from logic, it comes from pressure. Pressure that builds over time until the smallest thing lights the fuse, and then the words pour out like fire. Hot, unfiltered, irreversible. But the Stoics weren't naive. They never said, "Don't feel angry." They said, "Don't be ruled by it." They knew that true power isn't in expression, it's in restraint. The ability to hold space for your emotion without becoming it. The courage to pause before the outburst. Because here's the truth. Silence in the face of anger is not weakness. It's discipline. It's knowing that you are not your rage, that your initial impulse is not your final choice, and that waiting, even for just a few seconds, can change everything. I've had moments where I didn't wait, where I spoke from pain rather than principle, and those words, though short-lived, left long shadows. They echo in memory long after the heat of the moment has cooled, because what you say in anger becomes someone else's story. and no apology can erase how it made them feel. That's why I started keeping a note in my phone titled "Not Yet." Anytime I feel the heat rising, I open that note and type out what I want to say. Unfiltered, raw, no judgment. I don't send it. I don't say it out loud. I just write it down. Then I close the app and walk away. Later I read it again, and 90% of the time I'm shocked by how unnecessary it was, how childish, how temporary. And that's the point. Your words in anger rarely reflect your true self. They reflect your unprocessed pain. So the next time you feel that fire in your chest, try something small. Leave the room. Take a walk. Splash cold water on your face. Breathe deeply in and out until your heart rate slows. Move your body even just a little to break the emotional momentum. And then ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? Because most of the time, it's not the spilled juice. It's the stress, the fatigue, the unspoken frustration you've been carrying for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. Once you see that, you can respond instead of react. You can choose your tone, your timing, your words, or choose none at all. You don't always have to speak. Sometimes silence is the most powerful answer. That's emotional mastery. That's leadership. That's growth. It doesn't mean bottling things up. It means taking responsibility for what you bring into the world. It means protecting not just your peace, but the peace of those around you. Rachel later apologized to that student, not with excuses, but with ownership. And in that moment, she wasn't just teaching a lesson in math or reading. She was teaching what real humility looks like, what it means to make things right, and more importantly, what it means to pause before pouring your pain onto someone else. So let me ask you this. What would your life feel like if, in moments of anger, you gave yourself just 10 seconds of silence? What relationships could be preserved? What regrets could be avoided? What kind of person would you become? The goal isn't perfection. You're human. You will feel. But the next time that storm rises within you, remember, you're the vessel. You decide whether it spills over or settles in stillness. Principle 6. The more you complain, the more power you lose. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you caught yourself complaining, not once but repeatedly, about something you had no intention of changing? Was it your job, your boss, the weather, the government, the way someone talks too much at work? We all do it. Sometimes it slips out in casual conversation. Sometimes it becomes the soundtrack of our day. But what most of us don't realize is that every complaint, every repeated phrase of frustration slowly drains our energy, not just emotionally, but spiritually. I knew someone named Kevin, smart, hardworking, talented, but if you asked him how his day was going, you'd better be ready. He'd talk for 15 minutes about how his manager micromanaged everything, how clients didn't respect his time, how the system was broken, how nothing ever seemed fair. At first, it sounded justified, maybe even relatable, but over time it became his identity. Kevin wasn't just someone going through challenges. He was someone who lived in them, recycled them, rewrote them like a monologue, one that rarely led to change. Until one Friday morning, after yet another rant in the break room, a colleague jokingly said, "Man, if I had $1 for every time you said the word ridiculous, I could retire." It stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. That weekend, Kevin decided to try something radical. One full day without complaining. Not one negative word about anything he wasn't willing to actively change. If it came up in his mind, he'd write it down. If he said it aloud, he'd pause and reframe it into a question. Okay, so what can I do about this? He expected it to be hard. What he didn't expect was how peaceful it felt. He noticed that his energy stayed with him longer, that his mind was less cluttered, that he felt less like a victim of his own story and more like an author rewriting the narrative. That's the Stoic lesson. And it's not new. Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you interpret it. In other words, you may not choose the storm, but you choose whether to curse it or move through it. That's the difference between being emotionally stuck and being spiritually free. Complaining at its core is seductive. It makes us feel like we're doing something when we're not. It gives the illusion of movement, like a treadmill for your emotions. You talk about the problem, you relive the frustration, you get agreement from others, but the problem remains exactly where it is. And worse, now you're tired from talking about it. I've done it too. I've caught myself spiraling into complaints about work, relationships, the state of the world, and every time I left those conversations feeling heavier, not lighter. That's when I realized most complaints aren't a release. They're a weight. So how do we change this? Try what Kevin did. For one day, just observe. Count how many times you complain, not to shame yourself, but to become aware. You might be surprised how often you narrate negativity without realizing it. Then take it one step further. Every time you feel the urge to complain, ask, what can I do about this? Maybe there's something small. Maybe it's just a shift in mindset. Maybe it's letting go. But the act of asking puts you back in control. You're no longer a passenger. You're a participant. And here's another powerful tool. Only speak about things you're willing to act on. If you're not ready to lift a finger, maybe it's not worth repeating out loud. That's not suppression. That's strategy. That's emotional budgeting. Think of your energy like a battery. Every word you speak uses power. And complaints, they drain it fastest, especially the ones you say again and again without action. So why not protect your battery? Another thing to try, shift complaints into questions. Instead of this job is killing me, try what would a better workday look like for me? Instead of no one listens to me, ask how can I communicate more clearly or assertively? That mental pivot changes everything. Because when you complain, you reinforce the problem. When you ask, you create the possibility of a solution. Now, I'm not saying never speak about hardship. We all need to vent sometimes. We all need support. But there's a difference between processing pain and becoming addicted to the sound of your own dissatisfaction. And the truth is, when you learn to speak with intention, even your silence feels stronger. You become someone who conserves their energy for movement, not noise. Someone who acts instead of reacts. Someone who builds instead of blames. Imagine a version of you who spends less time replaying the same frustrations and more time finding new ways to live. Imagine the peace of no longer carrying around emotional debris disguised as conversation. That's what this principle is about. It's not about being silent forever. It's about choosing your words like you choose your investments, wisely and with purpose. So the next time you catch yourself mid-complaint, ask yourself, is this adding anything useful to my day? And if the answer is no, let it go. Redirect. Reclaim. Because the more you complain, the more power you give away. And the moment you stop, the moment you choose stillness over spiraling, you start to get that power back. Principle 7, those who listen understand more. There's a kind of magic in being truly heard. Not fixed, not interrupted, not advised, just heard. But that magic has become rare. In a world obsessed with speaking, posting, commenting, and having the last word, listening is becoming a lost art. And yet, it remains one of the most powerful tools for connection, understanding, and personal strength. Let me tell you about Emily. She's the kind of friend everyone feels safe around, not because she always has the right answers, but because she knows how to hold space. One afternoon, a close friend of hers, let's call her Sarah, showed up at her door unannounced. Red eyes, shaking hands, her marriage was ending, and she didn't know who else to turn to. Emily made tea, sat her down, and just listened. For an hour, Sarah poured out her heart. The confusion, the betrayal, the guilt, the grief. Emily didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fix anything. And then, at one quiet moment, she said one sentence. It sounds like what's hurting you the most is the feeling of being abandoned. Sarah froze, then burst into tears. Not because Emily had said something profound, but because someone finally understood what she hadn't even been able to say out loud. That's the power of listening. When done well, it gives people permission to feel, to be, to come home to themselves. Epictetus put it simply, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen more and speak less. It's not just a clever quote. It's a guide, a way of being in the world that shifts the focus away from ego and toward empathy. But here's the hard part. Most of us think we're listening when we're actually waiting for our turn to speak. How many times have you been in a conversation, nodding along, but mentally rehearsing what you're going to say next? How often have you turned someone's vulnerability into a story about yourself? It's subtle, it's often unconscious, but it sends a clear message. What you're saying isn't as important as what I'm about to say. And it pushes people away. I've been guilty of it too. I used to think that responding quickly showed that I was engaged, that giving advice meant I cared. But I learned, often the hard way, that the deepest form of care is presence. Not fixing, not proving, just being fully there. Think about the people you respect most, the ones who made you feel seen, really seen. Chances are it wasn't what they said that stayed with you. It was how they listened, the way they gave you their full attention, the way you could breathe a little easier in their presence. That's what listening does. And here's the beautiful twist. The more you listen, the more you understand. Not just others, but yourself. Because silence isn't empty. It's full of cues, subtext, emotional layers. When you stop filling every space with words, you start noticing things you never saw before. You see the pain behind someone's sarcasm, the fatigue in their smile, the hesitation in their voice. You begin to understand not just what they're saying, but what they're trying to say and what they're afraid to say. That kind of understanding builds trust. It builds relationships. It builds influence. In leadership, in parenting, in friendship, the best communicators aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who listen the deepest. So how do we get better at it? Start simple. First, put away distractions. When someone is speaking, put your phone down. Close the laptop. Look them in the eyes. Let your body say, I'm here. You matter. Second, reflect back. Not in a robotic way, but with genuine curiosity. Say things like, So what I'm hearing is, or it sounds like you're feeling, this doesn't just clarify, it shows that you're engaged, that you care enough to understand. And third, resist the urge to fix. Sometimes people don't need answers. They need company. They need someone to sit beside their pain, not stand above it. There's a line I once heard from a leadership coach that stuck with me. He said, "People rarely remember your advice, but they never forget how you made them feel." That's especially true when they're hurting. And in moments of tension, real listening becomes even more important. Instead of preparing your counter-argument, ask, what truth is hiding in what they're trying to say? You may not agree, but you'll respond from wisdom, not ego. That's the Stoic way. Calm, observant, grounded. Because listening isn't about staying silent. It's about being present, fully, intentionally, without needing to shine. And ironically, in a world full of noise, the quiet presence of someone who truly listens is unforgettable. So today I challenge you, speak less, not to retreat, but to connect. Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. You'll be surprised how much more you understand, how much more others open up, and how deeply you begin to change, quietly, steadily, from the inside out. Principle 8. You don't always have to react. We've all been in that moment. Someone says something sharp, a subtle jab, a passive-aggressive comment, maybe even a direct insult. And your first instinct is to fire back, to defend, to prove them wrong, to put them in their place. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, not out of fear, not because you're weak, but because silence, when it's chosen with intention, can speak louder than any reaction. Ethan learned that lesson the hard way. He was leading a high-stakes presentation at work, a room full of decision makers, clients, and colleagues. He had rehearsed 4 days, he was prepared. But midway through the presentation, during a quiet moment, one of his co-workers, someone who always seemed to undermine him, made a sarcastic comment under his breath, loud enough to hear, just loud enough for the whole room to feel it. You could feel the tension. Everyone paused, waiting to see what Ethan would do. He didn't snap back. He didn't smirk. He didn't even acknowledge it. He simply looked the man in the eyes for 3 silent seconds, then turned back to the screen and continued his presentation with steady confidence. And something shifted. The room respected him more, not because he fought, but because he didn't. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that perfectly captures this moment. The best answer to anger is silence. It's one of those truths that sounds simple, but takes a lifetime to master because we're taught to speak up, to clap back, to never let someone get away with it. We think that by staying silent, we're losing. But the truth is, not all silence is surrender. Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's self-respect. When you pause instead of reacting, you reclaim control. You show that your emotions don't own you, that you're anchored, not shaken. And in that pause, you do something rare in today's world. You break the pattern. Most people operate on autopilot. Action, reaction, attack, defense, trigger, explosion. But the moment you step outside that loop, the moment you choose to breathe instead of bite, you change the dynamic completely. I've been there too. I've said things in the heat of a moment that I later regretted. Not because they weren't true, but because they cost me more than they were worth. A reaction might feel good in the moment, but it often leaves a mess to clean up afterward. Broken trust, bruised egos, unnecessary tension. But the times I stayed quiet, the times I paused, let the moment pass, and responded later with clarity, those were the times I felt strongest. So how do you develop that kind of presence? It starts with awareness. Notice the moments when you feel your temperature rise, when your hands clench, when your heartbeat picks up. That's your signal. It's not a green light to react. It's a yellow light to slow down. Next, give yourself space. 3 seconds. That's all it takes. Count them in your head. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe through your nose. That brief pause can stop 1,000 bad choices. You can also create a quiet ritual to ground yourself. Some people press their thumb to their fingertip. Others wiggle their toes in their shoes. It doesn't matter what it is. It just needs to remind you that you are still in control of your response. And finally, ask yourself, does this moment require my reaction or my restraint? Because not every comment needs an answer. Not every provocation deserves your energy. And not every battle is worth fighting. Sometimes the most elegant move is to stay still. There's another layer to this too. When you respond impulsively, people see your reaction, not your wisdom. But when you stay calm in the face of aggression, people see your strength. Your silence becomes a message. You can try to pull me into the mud, but I don't live there. And over time, that silence builds a reputation. You become someone who doesn't flinch, who doesn't need to perform, who chooses their words like a craftsman, not like a weapon. And make no mistake, this isn't about being passive, it's about being purposeful. It's knowing when to speak with wicked and when to let silence do the speaking for you. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, whether in a meeting, in traffic, at the dinner table, remember, you don't have to play their game. You don't have to answer their chaos with more chaos. You can pause. You can choose. You can stay grounded. Because silence, when it comes from strength, isn't empty. It's full of meaning. And in a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, the person who can stay still, who can hold their tongue, hold their ground, and hold their dignity, that person commands respect. Every time. Principle 9, speak less, execute more. There's something quietly powerful about a person who works in silence and lets their results do the talking. Clara used to be the kind of person who announced everything. The moment she had an idea for a new project, a photo series, a startup, even a workout challenge, she'd post about it. Big things coming soon, she'd write. People would like, comment, and cheer her on. But behind the scenes, things rarely move forward. She would get overwhelmed, lose momentum, or simply move on to the next shiny idea. And slowly, without realizing it, her reputation began to shift. Not as someone inspiring, but as someone who talked a lot and rarely followed through. Then one day she stopped announcing. She didn't post. She didn't explain. She didn't hint. She just started working. Quietly, consistently, day after day, without applause. Months later, she launched a fully developed online art gallery. Beautifully curated, original, and complete. It surprised everyone. Even her closest friends didn't know she had been building it. But this time, they didn't just cheer, they respected her. Because this time, she didn't speak with intention. She spoke with results. There's a quiet truth in life that many people overlook. Real progress doesn't make noise. Speak with results, not with intention. It's tempting to share every plan, every goal, every move. We live in a world where transparency and building in public are seen as virtues. But there's a fine line between sharing and self-sabotage, between inspiration and validation seeking. When we talk too much about what we're going to do, our brain gets a dopamine hit. We feel a false sense of achievement, like we've already accomplished something just because we announced it. And that feeling, while pleasant, often kills the drive to actually follow through. It's like celebrating a race you haven't run yet. Stoicism reminds us, the more you externalize your path, the more you give away your power. When you hold your vision close, when you nurture it in silence, it grows stronger, purer, and more resilient. Because it's not dependent on praise. It's not diluted by distractions. It's yours. Think of the greatest moments of transformation, real lasting change. They often happen in solitude, in the early mornings, in the quiet evenings, away from the crowd. The caterpillar doesn't post progress updates from the cocoon. It emerges, fully formed, when the time is right. That's what Clara learned, and that's what we all need to remember. This doesn't mean we can't share our work or celebrate our milestones, but it means we must be discerning, intentional. Ask yourself, am I sharing this to serve others or to soothe my own insecurity? Am I announcing because it's ready or because I want reassurance? Because every time you speak prematurely, you weaken your edge. There's something magnetic about someone who moves in silence, who lets curiosity build, who creates mystery through focus. These people don't need to say much. Their actions, their discipline, their results, they speak volumes. In my own journey, I've learned that the things I kept private often turned out the strongest. Not because they were secret, but because they were sacred. They were protected from outside noise, from opinions, doubts, and expectations. And when they finally came to light, they carried the weight of truth. So how do you shift into this mode of silent execution? Start by noticing when you're about to announce something. Pause, ask yourself why. What's the purpose of sharing? And if it's not essential, keep it close. Let the work speak later. Build quiet habits. Journal your goals instead of tweeting them. Create checklists only you see. Measure your progress by your own standards, not by how many people are watching. And when you finally do share, let it be undeniable. Let it be complete. Let it be strong. Because when you've truly done the work, you don't need to explain. You just reveal. People will notice the shift. They'll feel the change. And you'll walk into rooms with quiet confidence, not because you told everyone who you were, but because you showed them. The Stoics understood this long ago. Epictetus didn't broadcast his teachings. They were recorded by his students because of the life he lived. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations privately, never intending to publish them. Yet they have outlived centuries. They spoke less and lived more. So today maybe you hold back a little, not from fear, but from strength. Maybe you let your actions carve your path. Let your silence carry momentum. And trust that when the time comes to speak, what you've built will say everything that needs to be said. Principle 10. Don't react on impulse. Sometimes the words you regret the most are the ones you said the fastest. Logan had always thought of himself as a calm guy, easygoing, collected. But that night, in the middle of a small disagreement with his girlfriend, something snapped. One comment from her felt unfair, maybe even a little cruel. And before he knew it, he fired back. Loud, sharp, instant. And the moment the words left his mouth, he knew they were wrong, not just unkind, untrue. They didn't reflect what he really believed. They reflected what his ego screamed in that tiny second of defensiveness. He apologized later, of course, but the damage had already been done. Her eyes were different. Her energy changed. The trust had cracked, all because of one moment where he didn't pause. Have you ever been there? That strange mix of adrenaline and regret? That split second when your mouth moves faster than your mind, and suddenly, it's too late. The Stoics knew this feeling well, and they warned us against it. They believed that reaction without reflection is the first sign of an undisciplined mind. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." In other words, you're not a prisoner of the moment. You have a choice, always, but that choice only appears if you give it space to emerge. And in today's world, where arguments flare up in texts, where social media rewards outrage, where we're constantly on alert, space is rare, but it's not impossible. Let's be clear, anger is not evil, frustration is not weakness. These are human emotions and they show up for a reason. But what separates a reactive person from a resilient one is this: the space between emotion and response. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when your partner says something that hits a nerve, when your boss criticizes you unfairly in a meeting, do you fire back immediately, or do you take a breath? That breath, that tiny, quiet, awkward pause, can save relationships, reputations, and your own self-respect. In Logan's case, had he paused just 3 seconds, just long enough to ask himself, "Is this how I want to show up right now?" the outcome would have been completely different. He still could have expressed himself, still could have set boundaries, but without that sting, without that sharpness that pushes people away. One of the core teachings in Stoic philosophy is that we are not events. We are interpreters of events. And interpretation is a skill. You train it, you strengthen it, you choose it again and again. It doesn't mean bottling up your feelings. It means giving yourself just enough room to respond with intention, not instinct. I once read a story about a Navy SEAL who said, "In high-stress situations, I always say to myself, take one breath, then act." Why? Because even in life or death situations, your first reaction is almost never your best. It's just the loudest. Imagine what would change in your life if you built this habit. Less explaining things you didn't mean, fewer texts you wish you hadn't sent, more control over your energy, more respect from others, and from yourself. You'd stop being someone who loses it and become someone others look to when the room gets tense. So how do we train this? Start small. The next time someone says something that frustrates you, try this. 1. Pause. Literally don't respond for 3 seconds. Just breathe. 2. Ask, what is this really about? Them or me? 3. Choose. Is this the moment to speak or to observe? You'll be surprised how much calmer you feel, and how often the moment resolves itself without your reaction at all. There's an ancient metaphor that says, if a jar of honey is shaken, only honey comes out. But if vinegar is inside, that's what spills. What spills out of you when life shakes you? Because that's your true content, not your performance, not your posts, not your apologies. Your reaction, the unfiltered one, tells the world who you are. So be someone who chooses, be someone who pauses, be someone who doesn't let the moment own you. Because you're more than your worst reflex. You're the person who can breathe, and become better. You're the calm in the storm, not because you were born that way, but because you trained that way. And that's the kind of strength that lasts. Principle 11. Silence is a form of leadership. In a world where everyone's trying to speak the loudest, the person who stays silent commands the most attention. It happened during a professional training workshop. The instructor posed a challenging question. How do you respond to harsh criticism? One by one, the participants jumped in. Voices overlapped. Some defended the need to speak up. Others insisted on setting boundaries immediately. Emotions escalated. The room buzzed with noise. But Monica, the designated team leader, said nothing. She just sat there, still, calm, watching, listening. At first, people thought maybe she didn't know what to say, but then, after a long pause, she finally spoke. I'm listening and I'm thinking. That was all, and just like that, the room fell completely silent, because in that moment, everyone realized who had the real presence. The one who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Silence, when intentional, is not weakness. It's strength. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They believed that true power lies not in how much you say, but in how much you choose to say. Epictetus once said, "Let silence be your general rule," or say only what is necessary and in few words. Because silence in the right moment becomes a mirror. It reflects everything. But this kind of silence isn't passive. It's not about being disengaged or indifferent. It's about being deeply present. It's about choosing not to react just to fill the space, but to understand, to observe, and to lead from a deeper place. Think about some of the most respected people you know. Leaders, mentors, elders. They're often not the ones shouting their opinions in every room. They're the ones who speak with clarity, not clutter. They listen more than they talk. And when they do speak, people lean in. That's not by accident. It's the result of restraint, self-awareness, and a deep inner confidence. And that kind of presence is magnetic. Let's be honest. Most of us feel uncomfortable with silence. We rush to fill the gaps in conversation. We feel awkward when a question hangs too long in the air. We equate stillness with weakness in talking with control. But that's a lie. The truth is, the louder you speak, the less space others have to think. But when you speak less, your words carry more weight. Monica didn't have to out-argue anyone. She didn't try to dominate. She simply embodied leadership by creating space, not taking it. And isn't that what great leadership is? Not just commanding the room, but calming it. Not forcing your way forward, but creating a path others want to walk with you. There's a quiet authority in people who know when not to speak, who know that wisdom isn't measured by word count, but by impact. So how can you apply this? Next time you're in a heated conversation, whether at work, at home, or even online, pause, observe, ask yourself, is this the moment to respond or the moment to reflect? Because not every moment requires your opinion. Not every disagreement needs your defense. And not every challenge deserves your energy. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply listen. You don't need to announce that you're thinking. You don't need to declare that you're calm. Your silence will speak for you, if it comes from a place of grounded clarity. In fact, the greatest leaders are often the ones who make you feel heard, not the ones who talk the most. They create space. They model presence, and they invite reflection, not reaction. I once heard someone say, silence is not the absence of power, it's the channel through which power travels. And it's true. Silence gives your thoughts room to settle. It gives others a chance to feel seen. And it gives you the upper hand, not through manipulation, but through mastery. You lead not by controlling the room, but by mastering yourself within it. So today, in a world obsessed with noise and opinions, remember Monica. Remember her stillness, her short, thoughtful response, and the ripple effect it had on an entire room. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of leader you've been all along. You just needed the silence to see it. Principle 12. The wise don't let emotions lead. Jason had spent months preparing, late nights, long essays, carefully built dreams. His application to study abroad wasn't just about a degree. It was a chance to grow, to start over, to become more than what life had handed him so far. So when the rejection letter came in, it hit like a punch to the chest. No feedback, no explanation, just a cold, impersonal, "We regret to inform you." In that moment, emotion took over. Jason felt the anger bubbling, the frustration, the voice inside screaming, "They didn't even give me a chance." Within an hour, he had typed out a long, emotionally charged email to the admissions office. He wanted them to feel what he was feeling. He wanted to be heard. But before he hit send, he paused, just long enough to ask himself one question. Will this help me? Or just satisfy my pride for a moment? And instead of sending that email, he closed his laptop and walked away. He gave it 24 hours. When he came back the next day and reread what he had written, he felt a shift. What had felt like truth the night before now just looked like emotional noise. He deleted the email. Then he did something wiser. He started again, not from anger, not from ego, but from clarity. He reread the application criteria, asked for feedback from mentors, rewrote his statement with more precision and less emotion. Months later, he reapplied, and this time he got in. That right there is the essence of wisdom, to feel deeply, but to act deliberately. The Stoics taught that emotions are not the enemy, but acting blindly under their influences. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It's easy to believe that the wisest people are those who don't feel much, that they're cold or disconnected. But the truth is, wise people feel everything. They just don't let those feelings drive the car. They let emotion inform them, not command them. And isn't that one of life's greatest tests? To stand in the fire of rejection, loss, or betrayal, and still respond with grace instead of retaliation. Think about how many regrets in life come from acting too quickly. How many bridges burned because of an email sent too soon, a message fired off in anger, a post made in bitterness, and once it's out there, you can't pull it back. But if you wait just long enough for the storm inside to pass, you often see things differently. You start to realize most situations don't need a reaction, they need reflection. Jason's story is not rare. We all have moments when our emotions feel so strong that they demand action. But that demand is a trap, because what feels urgent in a storm often becomes irrelevant in the calm. Let me ask you this. How many times have you said something in the heat of the moment, only to wish you hadn't? What if instead you made it a personal rule? Not to respond when your body is tense, when your breath is shallow, when your chest is tight. That's not avoidance, that's self-mastery. Wisdom, as the Stoics saw it, is not a lack of emotion. It's the discipline to pause before the emotion becomes destruction. Imagine a world where more people paused, where more leaders, parents, partners, and strangers stopped for 24 hours before acting out of hurt or pride. How many fewer wars, personal and global, would exist? We can't control how life hits us, but we can control what we do with that impact. Jason didn't repress his feelings, he allowed them. But he didn't follow them. He followed reason. He followed a higher standard, and that's what changed everything. Here's a simple tool that helps. Whenever you feel triggered, disappointed, or rejected, write, get the emotions out. But don't send. Not yet. Sit with it. Let time clarify what's real and what's just reaction. Often the mere act of waiting brings you the wisdom you didn't know you had. In the end, Jason didn't lose. His first rejection was actually his training ground. The real test wasn't the application, it was his response to the rejection. And he passed that test with quiet dignity. So the next time life pushes you to the edge, remember this. The wise are not those who never get upset. They're the ones who wait before responding. They're the ones who hold the space between the feeling and the action. Because that space, that sacred pause, is where character is forged and wisdom begins. In the end, this journey of mastering our words isn't just about silence. It's about identity. It's about the person you become when you no longer allow your mouth to be faster than your mind, or your emotions to dictate your voice. Every time you choose not to react, not to overshare, not to explain your worth to those who refuse to see it, you are building something deeper: integrity, self-respect, inner power. And that kind of power doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't perform for applause. It's quiet, steady, undeniable. Think of the strongest people you have ever met. The ones who walk into a room and don't need to raise their voice. The ones who don't interrupt, don't argue, don't rush to prove themselves. But when they finally speak, everyone listens. Why? Because their words carry weight. And that weight comes from one thing: discipline. Discipline of the tongue, discipline of timing, discipline of presence. You've probably noticed it by now. We live in a world obsessed with noise. Everyone wants to talk, post, explain, vent, declare. But in the middle of all that shouting, there's a rare kind of person who does something radical, who listens, who waits, who only speaks when their words can add something real. And in that silence, you begin to hear the voice of someone truly powerful: yourself. The Stoics weren't against speech, they were against wasted speech. They believed that your words are a reflection of your values, your character, and your inner state. If your thoughts are clear, your words will be precise. If your heart is calm, your voice will carry peace. But if your mind is in chaos, your speech will be scattered, loud, and reactive. He who masters his words masters his destiny. That's not just a beautiful quote. It's a way of life, because every sentence you choose not to say is a moment of self-respect. Every argument you don't chase, every secret you don't spill, every reaction you delay, it's all evidence that you are becoming someone stronger than your impulses. And when you do speak, people will feel it. Not because you raised your volume, but because you raised your standard. You became someone who speaks less but lives more. Who explains less but acts more. Who boasts less but builds more. And if nobody claps for you today, let that be okay, because you don't need applause to know your worth. Let your results speak. Let your character echo. Let the way you carry yourself silently, steadily, be the message that can't be ignored. Real strength doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be seen. It grows quietly, patiently in the background. And then one day it stands so tall, it can't be denied. So as you walk back into your daily life after this video, carry this principle with you. You don't have to prove anything with your words. Let your presence speak. Let your actions speak. And above all, let your silence be filled with clarity, purpose, and inner strength. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who speak with intention and live with truth. If this message spoke to you, take a moment to reflect. What area of your life is calling for more silence, more patience, more strength? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and if you found this helpful, please consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. We post daily Stoic-inspired reflections to help you build a life of calm, clarity, and unshakable character. Your journey is quiet, but it matters, and I'm honored to be walking it beside you.